All right, so welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us on our last evaluation seminar of the year on needs assessments. My name is Marianne Obi, and I'm joined by my evaluation division colleague Mary Ellen Eonu, and we're really excited for this session. So let's get started. All right, so needs assessments. What is a needs assessment? A needs assessment is a systematic process for determining and addressing gaps between current conditions and desired conditions. Essentially, it's a program planning tool that allows you to clearly identify problems and then develop targeted and actionable solutions for addressing those problems. A needs assessment allows you to better allocate finite resources towards implementing feasible and actionable solutions by gathering data to inform effective program activities that will address the actual needs and wants of program participants. So a needs assessment allows you to figure out the information you need, allows you to answer questions that helps in the program planning process, in the process of determining what activities need to go into a program. So when should you be conducting a needs assessment? Most commonly, needs assessments are conducted proactively before a program is ever implemented. So if you're looking at creating a brand new program or implementing a brand new program, or possibly even maybe you're thinking about a new component for a program, you might consider conducting a needs assessment before you get started to help you understand what your program participants are interested in, what they're looking for, so that you can better target your activities to those needs and interests. You can also conduct needs assessments retroactively when issues or challenges are identified. So say you have a program that's been ongoing for a while, when you realize that something's not working quite right, or some other challenge arises, you can go back and retroactively conduct a needs assessment to help you try to figure out why something in your program isn't working, or maybe why you're not seeing the results that you thought you were going to. Because part of the problem might be that some of your program activities aren't correctly aligned to the needs or the interests of your program participants. And then lastly, again, if you have a long-standing program, you can also build needs assessment activities into the continuous running of your program. So if you have a program that's going to be running for a long time, every few years you might conduct a needs assessment to make sure that your program activities align to the changing needs of your program participants. All right, so that's when you would conduct a needs assessment, but how do you conduct a needs assessment? So first and foremost, as with any evaluation activity we'll ever talk about, you want to start by clearly defining your needs assessment objectives. So when defining objectives, think about, why are you conducting this needs assessment? What is it you need to know, and how are the results going to be used? By concretely identifying a few key objectives at the outset, you'll be able to more easily identify what your needs assessment activities will be. So who will you be collecting data from, and what questions will you be asking them? Essentially, what will your data collection activities look like? It will also help you more easily figure out what kinds of resources you need to put into your needs assessment. So let's think about an example. Let's say you have an underserved youth population with limited educational prospects, and you want to design a targeted English language program for this group. And you decide before creating this program that you want to conduct a needs assessment. What kinds of questions might you want your needs assessment to answer? So what kinds of information would you want to gather during a needs assessment. And feel free to either type some answers into the chat or take yourself off mute. So for example, is there anything specifically about, so if you're creating an English language program that's targeting a specific youth population, is there anything about that youth population you might want to know before you started designing activities for this program? So for example, you might want to understand, so we know that they have maybe a limited education, but maybe we want to understand more fully, so what's limiting their education prospects? Is it a developing country? Maybe they have issues with internet access. Are there other resource problems? Exactly. So essentially, like, what are their barriers to education? We might want to understand those. If we're thinking about an English language program, maybe we more specifically want to understand why if there are barriers to English language learning. We may want to look at what their socioeconomic status is. We may also want to see if there is similar programming in whatever country or whatever community we're looking at. So if we're thinking about English language programming, are there other English language programs or maybe other language programs in this community? These are the kinds of questions you might try to answer in a needs assessment. So our next step in conducting a needs assessment is to be realistic about the resources you have available and your capacity. So you want to think about, based on your objectives for your needs assessment and the kinds of questions you want to answer, be realistic about how much time and how much money and how much staff capacity you have to devote to this needs assessment. Something to keep in mind, and we'll talk a little bit more about this later, but needs assessments can be very flexible. They aren't something that you have to devote a lot of time and energy to. They can be done very quickly and with very few staff resources. Even a very simple survey to a few key stakeholders can be a very powerful tool to get you a lot of very helpful data that can provide some really great insight. And then you'll want to identify your target audiences and your data sources. So given your objectives and your resources, consider what audiences and what data sources will help you assess needs. So will it be most effective to administer a survey to participants and alumni, or maybe more specifically, potential program participants? Will you want to hold interviews or focus groups with your implementing partners or your partner embassies? Do you want to examine existing literature or existing program reports? Or do you even want to go in and directly observe program activities or the program activities of similar program or the activities of similar programs? You may even want to consider conducting several complementary data collection activities. It all just depends on the questions you're answering and how much time you have for data collection. From there, of course, you'll look at summarizing results. And what I think is most important is getting feedback on the findings you have. So you've collected data, and then you want to dig into that data. You want to summarize everything. You want to summarize the information and reflect on everything that you've learned. And during this period of analysis, you'll want to discuss results with a diverse range of stakeholders. This could include your ECA colleagues or even leadership within your office, maybe your implementing partners, maybe colleagues at embassies that you work with, could even include participants or alumni. And this is really helpful because it allows you to talk to stakeholders who could interpret the results and the findings differently from you, which will help you think outside the box in terms of how your findings translate into future program activities. So lastly, of course, is at the conclusion of your needs assessment process, you want to develop solutions and then take action. So you want to take action in terms of taking your findings and turn those into program activities that are targeted to the needs of your participants. So you'll review the original objectives of your needs assessment, and think about how your results become recommendations and program activities. And then take action and go and develop your new program. All right, so we've talked about how to conduct a needs assessment and when you might conduct one, but why would we do this? What are the benefits of a needs assessment? First and foremost, they offer a systematic process for program development. So a needs assessment gives you fundamental information for understanding what your potential program participants need, which can be used for building your program's theory of change, and then eventually developing program activities which specifically address what your participants need and want. It also provides justification for decision making. So needs assessments can provide, after everything is done, after you wrap up your needs assessment activities and you've made a decision in terms of what program activities you're going to move forward with, at that point, it's usually too late to start justifying your choices. So a needs assessment allows you to document how you defined need, how you prioritize needs, how you assessed potential program activities, and how you selected one or more activities to actually move forward with. So it allows you to document why you chose specific activities. They're also scalable for any project timeframe or budget. So I alluded to this earlier, but needs assessments can be used for any project and they're super flexible. They can be very short, very quick projects that may only last a month or two with limited budgets and limited staff capacity, or they can be year-long projects that you put quite a bit of money into and cover a large range of data collection activities. And similarly, needs assessments can be done for very small potential programs or really large programs. There's no right or wrong way really to do a needs assessment. And then lastly, they offer interdisciplinary solutions to complex problems. Exchange programs are very rarely addressing issues that are improved by a single activity. So through their process, needs assessment encourages you to identify, compare, and when appropriate, combine activities that best accomplish desired results. Because through a needs assessment, you're generally identifying lots of different activities that could address the needs of participants, you're thinking, you're generally thinking outside the box. You're looking at activities that you might not have considered before. And so because of that, you can you can select lots of different activities, even combine lots of different activities, thinking of things that you wouldn't have before. You could be getting activities from other organizations, or ideas from other organizations, from your colleagues, even from program participants themselves. All right, so that's sort of the basics, the foundation of what a needs assessment is and how you would conduct one. Are there any questions at this point? Okay, not seeing or hearing any, I'm going to hand it over to Mary Ellen to walk us through an example.
Great, thanks, Marianne. All right, so I'm going to talk about a specific example of a needs assessment that the ECA Evaluation Division completed earlier this year, like late last year, earlier this year, for the Young Transatlantic Innovation Leaders Initiative, or YTLI. So for those of you who aren't familiar with YTLI, it was originally managed by EURPD and then moved over to ECA for management late last year, early this year. So YTLI is a year-long fellowship that has, historically, YTLI was a year-long fellowship targeted at young entrepreneurs that had virtual and in-person components. So it would usually kick off with a summit in Europe where mentors and fellows would meet and continue their engagement virtually, which would culminate in a 2-week in-person exchange where fellows would work intensively with their mentors and also spend some time in Washington, DC. So, based on this quick summary, mentorship was a key component of the YTLI Fellowship. And it also, one of the other components was also a business pitch at the end of the program. And the purpose of part of the program was really to connect young entrepreneurs in EUR to mentors, resources, and networks to help them further their ventures. So, because the program was moving away from EURPD into ECA management, the program team who was taking over management thought that this would be a really great time to take a step back and really think about, how they could further tailor the program to meet the needs of these entrepreneurs. Next slide, please. So these are some of the questions that the program team was interested in answering. So really around, what are some successful, what are the untapped needs of entrepreneurs? Why are businesses not succeeding? What's helping them take off? Is there a specific group that are at certain points of their career or, their business development process that they should really be thinking about targeting? And then finally, what characteristics make a good entrepreneur? Next slide, please. So this is how we in the evaluation division went about answering these questions. We only had a couple months to develop the YTLI needs assessment or produce the YTLI needs assessment. So we primarily focused on existing literature. The literature around entrepreneurship, particularly in EUR, population, ages, 25 to 35 thereabouts, trying to identify what were some of the barriers to entry for entrepreneurs, and then identifying some promising new practices in the field for young entrepreneurs. And then finally, because this program had been managed for many years in EURPD, we also wanted to take advantage of, the experience and conducted a discussion with some stakeholders in EURPD. And also we consulted with Ripper. I don't know if any of you have seen, but they recently completed the YTLI evaluation report. And Unfortunately, at the time when we were going through this, they hadn't finalized the report, but we were able to meet with some folks in REU to find out what some of their initial findings were. So that was also incorporated into the needs assessment. Next slide, please. Okay, so these are some of the things that we found. Barriers to entrepreneurship. For anyone who's worked with young entrepreneurs, I'm sure some of these will not be surprising to you. Access to finance was one of the biggest barriers identified in the literature. I feel like this is true across all regions. Other barriers that we identified included cultural barriers where, for example, in knowledge and attitudes, where entrepreneurship is not necessarily seen as a desirable career path in some countries in EUR. And there's not really any training or resources in the education system or systematically provided to young and prospective entrepreneurs. Additionally, regulation was a huge hurdle. Even though quite a few countries in EUR are part of the European bloc, there can be still quite a few differences in regulations and legislation, even down to a municipal level. So that makes it incredibly challenging for many young people who are trying to start their businesses to navigate all the different regulations and rules. Next, please. Training. So one of the promising or best practices that we identified was really the need to target your training, right? So target your training to the level of the entrepreneur that you're working with. So someone who has a startup is going to have very different needs than someone who's got an established business and is trying to scale up their business. So you really need to think about, who are we targeting, or what stage of business are we targeting, and what are the skills that they need to take that next step. Additionally, we also looked at virtual / in-person, so the blended model, and what were some of the best practices there. And it was really, the literature pointed to a few things, namely establishing some structure for virtual engagement. So really important to say, it's important that you meet once a week or twice a week, etc. But also making sure that that in-person engagement really happens to continue and strengthen the connection that happens virtually. Next. Mentorship. So for mentors, one of the things that we found was that it's also really important to provide training to mentors, right? Because they are typically people who are very experienced in their particular career, have a lot to offer to potential mentees and young entrepreneurs, but it's also helpful to provide them with some training so that they understand how to best engage and provide resources to their mentees. So really providing some initial training at the beginning of the program for potential mentors. Additionally, it's also important to help mentors or identify mentors who have wide networks, right? Because part of what mentees get out of the relationship with their mentors is access to their large and diverse network, and being able to tap into those, connections to learn or identify further resources. Next. And finally, don't forget the soft skills. That was really important, a really important component that the literature pointed to, being able to train entrepreneurs on communication skills, business pitches, but also sort of building that entrepreneurial mindset and really helping entrepreneurs see their career path. Next. And finally, it's important to not just, build those connections between mentors and mentees, but also building networks between the young entrepreneurs themselves, so that they have a network that they can tap into as they continue to grow their businesses and can continue to support each other and share resources. Next. All right, so that was the YTLE our needs assessment in a nutshell. Do you have any questions at this point about the process or any of the findings?
I have a question.
Yes.
Hi, this is Sarah, and I'm with Fulbright within ECA. And I just wanted to ask, as you were presenting, you frequently referenced the literature.
Yes.
And so I just wanted to ask, in a needs assessment, I guess I had typically thought of it as like you do a survey and you analyze survey results, but it sounds like you're also referring to other research to shape the needs assessment.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think as Marianne mentioned, a needs assessment can really take a lot of forms. So the one that we did for YTLE, it was mainly just a review of the literature. It was just a literature review because we had limited time and we wanted to turn it around fairly quickly. But you can definitely do a much, bigger needs assessment where you're actually, I think you should still start with a review of the literature or incorporate a review of the literature, but you can do like a survey or interviews or focus groups with potential participants of your program. So, I mean, I've participated or worked on needs assessments for entrepreneurs where, we did a survey of entrepreneurs to really understand what some of their barriers to access to finance were. And then we also did focus groups with them to really ground and be able to contextualize the results that we got from the survey. That was a much longer and larger scope needs assessment that took several months. And we had, a lot more resources to devote to that. So it really depends on, the scale of the program that you're trying to build and, the time and resources that you have available. So, if you have, 4 or 5 months, to be able to do a much bigger needs assessment, or you could even do something very quickly where you're just doing the survey and emailing it out to people and maybe doing a few interviews. It's a fairly flexible model. But I think the key is really to think about where can you find that information that you're looking for, and then tailoring that based on the time that you have available and the resources that you have available. Did I answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. Any other questions?
Let's see. There's a question from JB who's asking, are questions basically standard? So how do you choose your question for any given topic? So I would say for the most part, questions are going to depend on so your questions are going to be pretty specific for the needs assessment you're looking at. So for example, in the YTLE needs assessment, the questions are all really centered around entrepreneurship and the issues and challenge, issues that young entrepreneurs are facing pretty specifically in EUR. If you're looking at doing a needs assessment for something like, again, an English language program, your questions might differ. Your questions would differ because you might be looking at, you might be looking at barriers to education, or, you might be looking at what other programming exists. You might be looking at issues surrounding socioeconomic status. So I wouldn't say that there are standard questions for a needs assessment. It's really a question of what do you need to know in order to create your programming, in order to develop activities for the program you're looking at creating or modifying.
Okay, great. We have another question about what formats we would recommend for presenting a needs assessment to a team, if there are templates or guidelines. So for the Waitili report, and I'm sorry, I forgot to mention this, the final product was actually just a 10-page report that we put together with, a summary of best practices, what the literature had. You can definitely also just do a PowerPoint presentation where you're sort of highlighting some of the key findings. I think it really depends on the audience that you're presenting it to, and what you think is, I think it just, as long as you're presenting the findings and the key actionable pieces, it can really depend on the preference of the group that you're working with. So it can be a PowerPoint slide, it can be, I don't know, a 1-page infographic, or a 10, in our case, a 10-page report. Marian, do you want to add anything to that?
I don't, because I agree. I think, in terms of final product and how you present that, I would just echo, it really depends on what's going to work best for your team. I will say, when we present, when we have findings presented for our evaluations, we tend to work with PowerPoint presentations, and we have found that works, sort of sticking with, trying not to get too far into the weeds and sticking with their higher level summaries of findings. But again, like if you're presenting to a smaller group of people who really knows kind of the context and the scope and really wants to dig into the weeds, then maybe you do want to just talk about the report. So it, not to again give a it depends answer, but it really does just depend on what's going to work best for who you're presenting to and who you want to have that conversation with.
Okay. All right, I'm not seeing any other questions.
All right.
Okay, so this is how you can, this is a list of the ECA evaluations products and services. So as you can see, we've highlighted the program design / needs assessment, what our typical output is. So in this case, a short report and or bullet points. And then the questions that we typically answer. So I think that, which programs should be, elements should be included, and the estimated timeline. So if you're interested in doing a needs assessment of some sort, please feel free to reach out to us. You can email us. We're always happy to work on these. I personally love working on needs assessments. It's just another great way to learn about the research and what some of the best practices out there are. And then there's of course all our other products and services that we offer, including rapid feedback evaluation, process evaluation, outcome evaluation, and success case method. So this is also, we also have a summary of our products and services on our website. So I encourage our website on Diplopedia, our page on Diplopedia. So I encourage you, if you're at all interested, please feel free to reach out to us. Next.
And just real quickly, if you're interested in reading a little bit more about needs assessments, what they are, how they're conducted, this is a really great online book from the World Bank talking about, it's a guide to assessing needs. So it's a really great overview that I recommend looking into. And then lastly, here, of course, are all of the various evaluation division resources, including our Diplopedia pages, our public website, and if you have any other questions, or if you just want to reach out to us, our email down at the bottom. And as I mentioned at the beginning, this is our last evaluation seminar for the year. We are essentially taking the holidays off in November and December, but please join us starting in January for a whole new year of evaluation seminars. So that's it for needs assessments. Are there any other questions? And yes, as Natalie says in the chat, please also reach out to us if there are any other topics, if there are any topics you'd be interested in learning more about. We'd really love to get that feedback as we start building our calendar for 2021. Or if there were any seminars you heard this year that you'd like us to do again. Basically, any feedback you have, we'd really love to hear.
Yeah, I'm nodding my head. I don't know if everyone can see my camera, but please, yes, do feel free to give us any feedback if there were particular seminars that you thought were useful and would like to have again, or if there was a particular topic that we did that you would like more of a deep dive. We're always happy to do that. Yeah, just we're building out our calendar, so please feel free to let us know.
All right. Well, if there are no other questions, thank you all so much for joining us. We're also bummed that this is the last one for 2020, but you can always join us again next Thursday if you'd like one more evaluation seminar, because we will be repeating this session next Thursday. Tell your colleagues. But thank you all so much for joining us today, and we'll see you again in 2021.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.